to make a quick announcement that our Nicaea mug is now available at half price at the information point. So there is a few special edition, limited edition mugs available to commemorate this wonderful event. We're selling it for 10 euros. Okay, thanks.
I have no idea. Good afternoon. I'm Father Joseph Corolla, a Jesuit from the Pontifical Gregorian University, professor of patristics and church history, and I'm honored to be able to represent the Pontifical Historical Institute at the Holy See. Father Marek Inglot, the director, is present with us this afternoon. We have three speakers this afternoon, the first being Professor Gayle Woloschak. Professor Woloschak is the Vice President and Treasurer, Associate Dean for Graduate Studies and Post-Doctoral Affairs at Feinberg School of Medicine in Northwestern University, Chicago in Illinois, and she will be presenting her paper on Nicaea and the ongoing controversy over the date of Easter. Our second speaker is the Reverend Professor Carlo dell'Osso of the Pontifical Patristic Institute Augustinianum. Professor dell'Osso is also the Secretary of the Pontifical Institute for Christian Archaeology and a member of a consultor of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. Our third speaker is Professor Paul Mattei. Professor Mattei is a member of the Academy of Historical Sciences at the Holy See. He is also a member of the Academy of the Pontifical Academy of Latinitatis and had been professor at the University in Lyon. Each of our speakers will have 20 minutes to speak. Because of our changed schedule, there will most likely not be an opportunity for questions at the end, trying to limit our present moment to an hour. We have perhaps a few technological challenges when it comes to PowerPoint. Of course, technology, as it always wants to do, complicates our lives more and more. And so hopefully we will overcome this technological hurdle. But in the meantime, I'm happy to present Professor Woloschak.
Thank you, Father. Thank you, organizers, for inviting me to speak. And I want to announce that I have a notebook that somebody found. If this is anybody's, I'm going to leave it right up here. Please come claim it. I don't know, can you get my PowerPoint to work? If not, I can talk without the PowerPoint. That's not it. He has it up there.
It's only for the streaming.
Okay. No, it wasn't installed here. He's got my stick. He has to keep my stick. Look, I'll do it without. Don't worry. I'm fine. Okay, so is this okay? Better? Okay, and I'm going to try not to cough, everybody, but I'm sorry if I do. First of all, thank you, everybody, for staying for the last of the sessions, or no, the last day of the sessions. I'm going to shape this question around three ironies. The first irony is that while calendars are actually designed for us to share time so that we can monitor time the same way, calendars also often divide us, and they divide us for centuries. The second irony is that Orthodox and Roman Catholics, and Bishop Job mentioned this the other day, we use the exact same formula for calculating our choice of date for Pascha. In fact, we all follow the Nicene formula. The problem is we use different calendars. The third irony is that from the days of Nicaea until now, everybody has said, we are going to leave it to the astronomers. We are going to leave it to science to tell us when the proper dates are. And I believe today's science is so accurate that it can actually not help us in this, because all of these dates change every single year. So let me go through these point by point. So calendars divide us. People maybe don't remember this, but there was a time in the Jewish history when Pharisees and Sadducees actually calculated the dates for Passover differently. They had different calendars, and they did not celebrate Passover at the same time. Calendars divided them. There were the city-states of Greece that each city-state had their own calendar. So when it came time to plan festivals, they couldn't plan them together because, again, there were problems of calendar. The Egyptians had in their ancient history a civil calendar which followed the sun and a religious calendar which followed the moon. And so these led to major differences. In addition, the 7-week tradition has not been common for all, the 7 days per week tradition has not been common for everybody. Ancient Rome, pre-Julian calendar, used an 8-day week. Revolutionary France used a 10-day week. There was a time in ancient China when they used a 10-day week. So that too has changed over time and again has disrupted things. Okay, so what about the change in the Gregorian calendar? The Roman calendar was set based on the Julian calendar. It was set up by Julius Caesar he started beginning this in about 46 BC. He needed it because, number one, the Roman Empire had expanded, and he needed to unite the empire. And one way to unite the empire was to unite the calendar. In addition, the previous calendar had only been applied very loosely to people. So there was a group that decided to use this Julian calendar and adopted it, and it was used as the calendar of all. But how long have we had divisions between the use of the Julian calendar from the year 46 BC until today? And that difference divides the Orthodox world. There are some churches that follow the Julian calendar and some follow the Gregorian calendar today. And I just heard that the Arabic world just accepted the Gregorian calendar only recently in like 2023. So calendars divide us, even though that's not our intention. And that's going to be an important point when I talk a little bit later. Okay, so then what was the problem? So now let's look at the second problem, which is how Nicaea, the second irony, how the Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church came to celebrate these days differently. Well, the first thing I remember from what Bishop Job said the other day is he went through a big discussion about why in Nicaea it was important to celebrate the date of Easter together. And in fact, His Holiness the Pope said the same thing when we just heard him speak earlier. So what was happening? There were some groups, mostly in Asia, that were using the 14th day of Nisan, the Jewish feast day, which was close to their Passover, as the day to celebrate Easter, regardless of what day of the week it was. If it was Monday, it was Thursday, it was the 14th of Nisan. There were other groups that were using the first Sunday after Nisan. There were multiple celebrations throughout the Roman Empire. And wait, am I controlling this now? Oh, let me. That's fine. Yeah, thank you. And so we can see that so all of these different groups celebrated Easter on different times, and this was considered to be important. So Constantine got people together, and he said, we have to have a unified celebration. Honestly, Constantine also said he did not want to celebrate Easter with the Jewish people, and that's why he changed. So he fought to be able to have the Christians be distinct from the Jews, and this was important to him. So what were some of the decisions? Some of the decisions were that Pascha must be celebrated on a Sunday. It must not coincide with the Jewish Passover, and in fact doesn't need to follow the Jewish Passover. The interpretation was based on what Alexandria had established as the astronomical principle, and this was in fact what the Church of Rome was using, which was that it should be the first Sunday after the first full moon, after the first vernal equinox. What they then did is they turned to the astronomers of Alexandria. So here we have the church turning to science and saying, please help us set what the right day should be. And they celebrated this appropriately. This created uniformity, or at least apparent uniformity, throughout the church. This is from the text from the letter of the Synod in Nicaea to the Egyptians. This was not found in the Latin text, it's found in the Greek text. We also send you the good news of the settlement concerning the Holy Pascha, namely that in answer to your prayers, this question also has been resolved. All the brethren in the East who have hitherto followed the Jewish practice will henceforth observe the custom of the Romans and of yourselves, and of all of us who from ancient times have kept Easter together with you. Rejoicing then in these successes, and in the common peace and harmony, and in the cutting off of all heresy, welcome our fellow minister, your brother, your Bishop Alexander, with all the greater honor and love. He has made us happy by his presence, despite his advanced age, has undertaken such great labor in order that you too may enjoy peace. So this was a peaceful resolution to the date of Easter, among the many other things that were discussed at the Council of Nicaea. If you look at the actual decisions, though, there wasn't really much of an agreement except to follow what Rome was doing. So this was carried out. I won't go through all of the individuals who spoke at this time, but it was important that it not be celebrated in accordance with the Jews. And the council deferred to Rome to set the date, which was the first Sunday after the first full moon, after the first day of spring. And then to Alexandria to come up with when the lunar full moon would be and when the first vernal equinox would be. So despite all of these, these are the calculation differences between Orthodox Easter and Western Easter from 1994 to 2034. And you can see that there are a few years when it coincides, and there are a few years when it's very disparate. So if we all use the same formula, what's the difference? So we still use the same calculation, and I'm not going to go through all the reasons why this was important. Let me skip through this. And probably everybody here knows that the Julian calendar was inappropriate because it was off by first 10 days, then 11 days, then 12 days, and now 13 days compared to when the actual vernal equinox falls. So if you look at when the first day of spring should be, the Julian calendar is now, today, 13 days behind that. So in fact, if we look at the way the Orthodox calculate Easter, we are not actually celebrating it on the first Sunday after the first full moon after the first day of spring. We are celebrating it based on the Julian calendar date for the first day of spring. So we're not actually following the Nicene formula for Orthodox. Okay. Now, I need to say that it wasn't just the Orthodox world that had a hard time accepting the Gregorian calendar. It was proposed by Pope Gregory in 1582. It was refined for over several different years, and the correction wasn't adopted by Europe at all. The British government didn't accept it in 1752, until 1752, so almost 200 years later, from Rome to London for the acceptance. And then the leap year error cycle was also put in. It made it be very complicated. So there were calendar squabbles. Even as early as 546, Justinian actually said that he wanted to make sure it was celebrated on the first Sunday of the first full moon after the vernal equinox, and there were some people that were still celebrating it after Passover, and he ordered that meats be brought into the city on a particular day so that fasting would stop and people would go buy meats. And you know what? They brought in the meat, but very few people purchased it. They went with what they thought was right. So even in the 500s, we're having calendar disputes that are acted out by the people. So even in the times of Justinian, there were problems. Okay, so why is the Orthodox Easter so late? Most Orthodox use the Gregorian calendar for the celebration of major feasts, for the Nativity of Christ, for the Assumption of the Virgin Mary, for all major feasts. Most Orthodox churches, with the exception of Russia and some of the countries close to Russia, use the Gregorian calendar. But they made the exception to follow the Julian calendar for the setting of the date of Pascha. I'll talk a little bit about what some of the arguments were in that situation, but there are two modes of thinking about it. One is Orthodox will say the Julian calendar was in effect at the time of Nicaea, and therefore we should follow that calendar. And then the other mode of thinking is that one I mentioned earlier, which is it's meant to be the first full moon after the first day of spring. Shouldn't we be celebrating it based on the first day of spring, on the vernal equinox? Now, my next problem is that the Nicaea actually depended upon astronomers to calculate the date of Easter. And there are some problems with this formulation as well. First of all, the Earth is a terrible timekeeper, and celestial bodies are terrible timekeepers. We think in terms of whole numbers, but very few of our celestial bodies move in terms of whole numbers. How many days are in a year? 365.2422 days are in a year. That's hard to be able to calculate. We try to put in a leap year to compensate for that in our current Gregorian calendar, but they didn't do that at all for the Julian calendar, or they did it only every 3 years, actually, and it set things off. It's also hard to calculate for that extra 0.0022 days, which becomes hard. The 4 seasons are not the same length. They expand in the northern hemisphere and they contract in the southern hemisphere. So it depends on where you're choosing to calculate the first day of spring. Now, the Nicaea doesn't mention this, but in general, they try to use the location of Golgotha as their point of reference, and that's what most churches have done, but still that's also important. And then, I didn't throw in the lunar calendar, which also varies considerably and throws a mess in this. So, and then, this is like crazy, but the length of a day can vary, and I think I have a slide on it, so I'll mention it. Here it is. So, how do we set our clocks today? We use an atomic clock. We have the decay rate of cesium-133, a radioactive element. We watch it decay, and as it decays, we measure seconds. So we use that to set our clocks, and most of us that are using these clocks are actually designed to go toward what the atomic clock is, so therefore we're accurate. I didn't know this before I started doing all these studies, but it turns out that the Earth's rotating around for a single day varies. It can vary by like 0.001 seconds because of the winds. It can vary by 0.02 seconds because of the freezing and thawing of the Earth. So now throw in scientific precision into all this, and that makes it become very difficult to calculate days. What about the vernal equinox, the spring equinox, the first day of spring? Well, it's the day when the equator of the sun is overhead and the days and nights are of equal duration. That's the definition. And what we try to use, as I said before, was Jerusalem as our basis for choosing that. Now, what the churches have done is they've chosen March 21st as the first day of spring. It's actually astronomically not the first day of spring. And I'll show you why in a minute. And then they chose to look at the first day of spring based on the sun, but you can use the constellations as well, but that's even less accurate. So that's why they chose not to do that. Okay, so here's the tilt of the Earth. This is what the vernal equinox will look like in 2025, and it's going to fall around March 21st, or it did fall around March 21st. But the tilt of the Earth's axis varies. I have a picture in a moment. And it can vary so that you get the first day of spring on March 18th one year and March 21st the next year. This shows how much it can tilt and what a difference that makes. So you can imagine, if you're worried about length of day, then you've got that extra tilt that's coming in there. Okay, so in 325, the Julian calendar was in use, and the first day of spring was March 21st, and so it all set up fine. But later, it became problematic as the calendar became inaccurate. But today, the first day of spring can actually be March 18th. The church will calculate it on March 21st. The Roman Catholic Church will calculate it on March 21st. So we're not actually following the scientific approach. Nobody is. Nobody's following the science. The second thing is then, another complexity, we don't calculate Easter just based on the sun. We calculate it based on the moon too. The moon has its own variations. So a typical Metonic cycle, and the Metonic calendar is normally 12 years of 12 lunar months and 7 years of 13 lunar months. That's how people calculate it. So now imagine that you have to calculate when the first full moon occurs. The first full moon can occur very differently from one or another. The Julian calendar right now is about 5 days behind for most months, for most years, but it can be very different lengths as well. And, this is just a depiction. No, I want to draw attention to the Pan-Orthodox Conference of 1923. So Bishop Job, the other day, he mentioned several conferences that were important, but I want to draw your attention to this one, because this was a conference of all Orthodox churches that were represented. And they made a decision that I think, if we could follow it today, it would help us come up with a common date for Easter. So the Pan-Orthodox Conference was an invitation. The churches that it showed up were the Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, Serbia, Cyprus, and Romania. And remember that at the time, there was no church in Russia. This is in just post-Soviet times. They said, this was the quote from the Metropolitan of Montenegro, "We do not advocate the adoption of the Gregorian calendar because such a thing would be a harmful influence, not just to the religious sentiments of our own Christians, but in general for the welfare of orthodoxy." Okay? This was one attitude, and that's how the council started off. But then they started to discuss things. And they talked about many issues, and they looked at the canons and the calendar question. And they asked the questions, is it necessary for the Pascha change to be an adjustment of movable feast days as well? And this is when the church recommended the move to the Gregorian calendar for the fixed feast days and not the movable feast days. But then they asked the question, are there parts of the church that perhaps would not accept the reform? Now, what did I say in the beginning? Calendars divide. So what were they worried about here? They were worried about division within the Orthodox Church. And that's why they discussed this. All the same, they decided that the celebration of Pascha from Nicaea dealt with the requirement for the celebration of the greatest of the Christian feasts by all churches everywhere at one and the same time. So they noted that this was important. They saw the change to a new calendar as a practical benefit to Orthodox immigrants in America, especially. They reviewed many different plans. Many of them were rejected. They then discussed this further. This was their final. This is one of their final conclusions. They decided that the original decisions of Nicaea to set a date for the celebration of Pascha was to prevent arguments and disagreements and to create unity. That was the whole purpose. This council agreed that that was the purpose. Whatever prevailed at that time and still prevails among us concerning the computation of the Paschalian and the Hyacinthe is only partly and indirectly related to the aforementioned canons, is owed in other respects to the astronomical knowledge and experience of that period, and in no way binds the church. It suffices only for her to have the spirit and the aim of the relevant existing canons of the ancient church. Nothing exists to impede her dogmatically or even simply canonically from restoring the equinox from the present March 8th to the March 21st of the same month as was supposed for the Council of Nicaea. So here's the decision made by Orthodox churches gathered together in unity in 1923 to move the date to say that there's nothing that impedes us from doing that. It's not canonically a problem to do that. I'm at time. I'm not going to go through all the rest of this, but I want to just end my references. Okay, with my comments. So what I want to say is, in fact, in my opinion, the Orthodox Church is not canonically accurate today. The choice of following the Julian calendar is a legalistic argument, but if one actually follows the spirit of Nicaea, the spirit of Nicaea was to have there be a coincidence of Pascha with the first day of spring. It is not. It's supposed to be about opening a new life. It is not in the first day of spring at this point. Second of all, saying that we rely on an old Julian calendar for only Pascha and nothing else is a bit hypocritical. I do know that what motivates a lot of this is fear of division within the church, and that has been a motivator. And with that, I'll end. Thank you very much.
I want to thank you, the organizer of this Congress, for the invitation, and also to the President and the Secretary of the Pontifical Committee of Historical Science. The topic of my contribution is African Computists around Pseudo-Cyprian's De Pascha Computus. That means that now we have to go back to the 3rd century and to try to understand how they calculated the date of the Pascha. Was not a simple thing, was very difficult, and we have also to take in mind that the problem of time is not only a chronological topic, but it also an exegetical topic, a sacred topic. Not only, we don't need our clock, we need to read the Bible to think the time, the creation, and so on. Now I go to my paper. The work De Pascha Computus is an Easter Computus written in the 5th year of the Emperor Gordian. That means in 243 by an anonymous author who probably came from Africa, as can be inferred from the biblical quotation he used. Although the author remains unknown, he is thought to have been a Novatianist. The importance of this text lies in the fact that it is the oldest known literary source on Easter cycle. In this sense, the Computists made a considerable contribution to the study of the Easter computation, basing it on a 16-year cycle, as can be seen both from the text and from the table attached at the end of the reading. It should be noted that calculating the date of Easter was particularly difficult because both the solar and the lunar years had to be taken into account. Given this, according to the lunar calendar, Easter falls on a fixed day. That means the Sunday following the spring full moon, while in the solar calendar, the date is variable because the lunar year is approximately 11 days and 6 hours shorter than the solar year. Now, in order to shift the difference in length between the solar and lunar years indefinitely, a month was added to the lunar year at regular intervals, the so-called embolism or intercalary year. And this required the composition of tables or charts that allowed for its calculation and identifications. In this regard, the Computists intended to correct the calculations made by his predecessors, among whom some scholars have identified the enigmatic Hippolytus, author of an Apodexis Chronu to Pascha, whose Easter table has come down to us engraved on a stone slab placed at the base of the statue assembled in 1551 and visible today at the entrance to the Vatican Apostolic Library. This calculation is based on a 16 years cycle, just like our Computists, starting from the year 222 and continuing for 112 years until the year 324. Others, however, believe that it's not possible to identify who this antecessor, or in Latin, antecessores, were, nor to think that it was Hippolytus. That said, the purpose of this work, is to reveal the mysteries hidden beneath the biblical calendar. Thus, the author, rather than relying on astronomical calculations, draws on biblical teachings to propose his correction of the calculations of previous Computists. Now I go to the content of this treatise. The work consists of 23 short chapters or paragraphs. In the first, the author sets out the purpose of his work, which is to identify the first day of the first month of the year on which the Jews were required to celebrate Passover on 14th day of the moon. Because Christians, I quote, can never stray from the path of the truth and, so to speak, by ignoring what day Easter is, they cannot follow the Jews like blind and foolish people, beginning under God's guidance to indicate not only the first day on which the lamb was killed in Egypt, but also to establish the day of the future Easter for Jews and Christians. End of the quotation. Therefore, in the light of this text, it seems that until then, Christians in the West had followed the Jews in determining the date of the 14th moon, even though Easter was celebrated on Sunday following the 14th moon. The Computist then quotes the book of Exodus chapter 12. At this point, a real exegetical examination begins, according to which the Jewish Passover, narrated in Exodus 12, is the typos of Christ's passion. In fact, the Jewish Passover is celebrated secundum imaginem, while the Christian is celebrated secundum veritatem. In this regard, we note that the author's exegetical approach is based on a typological allegory, according to which events and characters in the Old Testament are typoi, or figure, of the events and characters in the New Testaments. Returning to the text, the Computist addresses the question from afar, that is, from the creation of the world, and states that the first day of creation, when God distinguished light from darkness, fell on the 8th day before the calends of April. That means 25th of March, from which some Computists, I quote in Latin, aliqui ex nobis, establish that the first month of the year, counting 11 days before the 25th of March, arriving to the Ides, Ed in Latin, of March, that is 15th of March, and 19 days later arriving to the Ides of April, that is the 13th of April. However, the Computist considers the calculation to be wrong, because if the first day of creation fell on the 25th of March, and God created the moon at the fourth day, that means the 28th of March, given that God created the full moon, that means the 14th moon, subtracting 11 days would have resulted in 17th of March, and adding 19 would have resulted in 15th of April. And now, from the Ides of March to the Ides of April, hence the error of the Computist. You see that it's not easy to follow this calculation. But the author wants to say that his predecessors were wrong, and their mistake was that they calculated the date 2 days before. This is the topic. The Computist then offers a calculation of Easter using the table he has compiled, referring to the lines as he counts the dates of Easter up to Jesus Christ, who would have celebrated Easter with his disciples. 15 and 79 years after the first Easter, that is, of the Exodus. In paragraph 10, we have an example of a typological and numerological exegesis. The Computist mentions the sacrifice of Isaac, which foreshadows that of Christ on the cross, and then interprets, in a Christological sense, Abraham's battle to free his nephew Lot from the hands of the kings of the Chaldeans and Persians who had invaded Sodom. On that occasion, Abraham counted 318 servants, which the Computist interprets as follows: 100 as the years of Abraham, which multiplied by 3 make 300, which in Greek is marked with the letter tau, the sign of the cross, and 18, which in Greek is marked by the letters IOTA, 10, and eta, 8. That means the initials of the name of Jesus. This exegesis of the Old Testament continues throughout the world with the intention of counting the years from the first Passover to that of Christ, giving the events and characters of the Old Testament's Christological meaning. In particular, we would like to point out paragraphs 13 to 18, that means the central part of the work, which contains the exegesis of the book of Daniel, chapter 9, where the 70 weeks are discussed. I quote, 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, to finish the transgressions, to make an end of the sins, to atone for the iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the Holy of the Holies. In particular, paragraph 15 deals with the 7 and the 62 weeks. For the Computists, the 7 weeks contain 49 years, which include the 46 years that refer to the years spent rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem, to which are added another 3 years signifying the passions and the resurrection of Christ. Then, at the end of the 16th paragraph, we read, I quote, "And then it was shown that the square, the temple, the surrounding wall, and the city were all completed and protected after 49 years. And all this work was accomplished as a prefiguration of the church. In truth, we have..." End of the quotation. In truth, we are faced with an exegesis that recurs in the majority of Christian exegetes who refer the prophetic text that mention Jerusalem to the church. The Computist ventures further and further in this type of numerological exegesis and asserts that if the number 18, which signifies the name of Christ, is subtracted from the number 49, the remaining 31 coincide with the years of Christ. Therefore, these numbers conceal a Christological and ecclesiological meaning which the Computists wish to highlight. This number can also be explained by the eternal torment reserved for those who do not believe or for who persecute the servants of God, because 49 was the 8 in cubits of the flame of the furnace into which King Nabucodonosor had Ananias, Azarias, and Misael thrown, according to the account of Daniel in the chapter 3. The author then goes on to interpret the 62 weeks, which indicates the 434 years. That means the sign of the cross, the time of passion, and the third day of resurrection. In this sense, the author breaks down the number 434 into 100, which is the age of Abraham when Isaac, the figure of Christ, was born, then 300, which indicates the cross as the sign of the Greek tau, plus 31, the years of Christ, and the 3 days leading up to the resurrection. Moving on to the birth of Christ, the Computus places it on the 5th day before the calends of April. That means the 28th of March, which is the same day of the creation of the sun, corresponding to the 4th day of creation, which began on the 25th March. And so, the author offers once again a Christological interpretation of the solar year consisting of 365 and a quarter days, arriving at 4 evangelists and 12 apostles through the symbolism of the seasons and the months. Now, Now I go to the themes and then to some conclusions. As mentioned above, the Computists wanted to correct the calculation of 14th moon, which some of his predecessors had identified as the day of the creation. That means the 25th March, and which should instead have been placed on the 4th day of the creation. That means the 28th of March, the 5th day before the calends of April. Consequently, for him, the Novus Mensis extended from the 17th of March to the 15th of April, and not from the Ides of March to the Ides of April. Another theme of the work is to reveal the mysteries hidden in the biblical calendar through the symbolic interpretation of numbers and the typological exegesis of the Old Testament, according to which the Jewish Passover is a figure of the true Passover. Isaac is a figure of Christ. The square, the temple, the city, walls, and the rebuilt city are symbols of the church, and so on. In addition, the Judeo-Christian elements present in the work have been highlighted, such as the 318 servants of Abraham, and so on. Now, I go to some concluding suggestions. The author of the Computus considers his explanatory calculation to be of a divinely inspired circle, which had unfolded uninterruptedly throughout the entire history of salvation, from creation to the crucifixion of Christ and up to his own day, and clearly expects readers to accept and to recognize it as true. In this sense, he does not wish to unify the costumes of different churches, nor to eradicate heresies, but rather to establish the truth and avoid errors in the calculation of Easter. In fact, in the treatise we do not find any mention of heresies or schism in the church because of the date of Easter, but rather a clearly distancing from Jews and their practices, so that this calculation seems to be an invitation to Christians to dissociate themselves from Jews, and not an accusation against the Quartodecimans. In this regard, it has been noted that in the treatise, the controversy over the day of Easter is extremely mild. Rather, the criticism is directed at those who in their calculation anticipated Easter by 2 days because of a calculation error, and not because they constituted a schismatic community or separate church. In this sense, it can be said that the difference of opinion or calculation regarding the date of Easter was not considered in this text at this moment a cause of schism. Moreover, the Easter tables were drawn up by private Christians, so they had to be different and were not imposed by any authority. And in conclusion, we recall that these Easter calculations of the early decades of the 3rd century were replaced by a more accurate 84-year cycle, the most important, which is the so-called Supputatio Romana, which was in use in Rome from the middle of the 4th to the middle of the 5th century. It should also be noted that we do not find in this treatise the demands that emerged at the Council of Nicaea, that means to eliminate the differences between the churches and to standardize the date of Easter. Because in that historical period, the differences were attributed to calculation errors rather than to theological or political religious diversifications. Thank you so much.
We shall speak about Nicaea and Eastern mathematical rules and historical-theological questions. You have my text I shall summarize many things. 4 reasons that will be better illuminated by the rest of this paper. Christian Easter is, in our calendar, Julian or Gregorian, a movable feast. The formula used to establish the annual date today is as follows. Easter falls on the Sunday following the 14th day of the moon, which reaches this age on March 21 or immediately after. Traditionally, the settling of this formula is attributed to the Council of Nicaea. Moreover, to this council is also commonly attributed a rule of calculation that takes into account the 3 discriminating elements contained in the formula: Sunday, the 14th day of the moon, and the vernal equinox. This double attribution goes back to Dionysius Exiguus, a Scythian monk of the second half of the 1st century. No, among the canons recognized as emanated from the Council of Nicaea, none of them takes care to detail either the Paschal formula or the calculation to implement this formula in practice. Yes, the unanimous documents contemporaneous with the Council or quasi-contemporaneous don't deny that the Council was concerned about the dissension caused in this time by the various way of establishing the date of Easter, and that, in this respect, he prescribed the unity of all churches of the empire. There is therefore a contradiction between the 2 series of observation I've just summarized: double attribution versus evasive nature of the documents. The purpose of this paper is to examine or even to remove this contradiction. In concreto, it will be a question of pointing out as accurately as possible what the Council did or wanted to do, and with what success. I shall do this in 3 parts: collect contemporary text, draw lesson from this text, and take a look to the after Council, at the future of the Council's decision of whatever nature they may have been. For such a glance allows us to better understand in retrospect the aim of the Council on the subject that concerns us. There is a bibliography. I don't quote it. First part, Nicaea and before Nicaea, review of the text. The text we have about the question of Easter at Nicaea are of two categories of authors. First category, Greek ecclesiastical historians, Eusebius, Socrates, Sozomen, Theodoret of Cyrus, and second category, a contemporary Athanasius of Alexandria. First, the Eusebius dossier. In the ecclesiastical history, in the fourth and fifth book of this history, Eusebius speaks about the quartodeciman quarrel of the second and third century, the second century. We shall come back on these quartodecimans. In the book 5 and also book 7, Eusebius speaks about Anatolius of Laodicea. Eusebius, above all, in the book 7, Eusebius quotes, and likely at the end, just abridged, an extract from Anatolius' rules on Easter. This text is important, and we will come back to it. But no, we can note two major features. First feature, it names Jews who formerly placed the Passover obligatorily after the vernal equinox. And two, it gives some details on their way of calculating. Second piece of the Eusebian dossier, the life of Constantine. In the life of Constantine, book 3, there is a copy of Constantine's letter to the Synod of Nicaea. After the Synod of Nicaea, to the churches that were not represented there, on the need for a common date of celebration that departs from the Jewish Computus. And in book 4 of this life of Constantine, there is a letter of the emperor to Eusebius himself for thinking of the sending of a book on the Easter. After Eusebius, other Greek ecclesiastical historians. There are three. Socrates, I quote only in the book 1, chapter 9, a copy of Constantine's letter after the Synod of Nicaea to the churches that were not represented there. And in book 5, we have, by the historian, a complete examination of the question of Easter. Sozomen is shorter. In the first book of his history, he alludes to Constantine's displeasure as seeing the Oriental churches celebrating Easter at the same time of the Jews and apart from the other churches. Finally, Theodoret also in his ecclesiastical history, Theodoret quotes a copy of the letter of the Synod of Nicaea to the Egyptian and a copy of Constantine's letter after the Synod. Apart from these historians, Eusebius and other ecclesiastical historians, we have the testimony of Athanasius of Alexandria. In 3 passages, one passage of the Synodis, in this passage, chapter 5, the treatise of Athanasius was written after the Council of Seleucia Rimini in 359. In the passage concerning the date of Easter at the Council of Nicaea, Athanasius emphasized that, 1, the Paschal question was on an equal footing with the Trinitarian faith at the center of the Synod concerns. 2, it was about ensuring that, first, Christians, in order to fix the date of Easter, do distinguish themselves from the Jews. 2, they all celebrate on the same day. The question was precisely to bring to common practice certain churches of Syria, Cilicia, Mesopotamia, which differed from the other church of the empire. Second testimony of Athanasius, the letter Adaphros. It repeats exactly what we have in the Synodis. And the third testimony of Athanasius is in the De Decretis Nicene Synodi, chapter 35. This treatise quotes the letter of the council to the Egyptian. What we can summarize from this inventory of documents is that there are few documents about the question of Easter. We have one in our historians, the letter to the Bishop of Egypt. It's the only text on the Paschal question from the council itself. It's possible that its author was, if not Alexander of Alexandria in person, at least somebody close to him, Athanasius, who was his deacon and was with him at Nicaea. On Easter, this letter to the Bishop of Egypt contains 2 essential features: the unity found, the resurrection of the Jewish date. And second document we have in the historians, Eusebius and others, is the Constantine letter to the church after the council. To these 2 elements, we must add the contemporaneous testimony of Athanasius. That's the inventory of the sources. The teaching, second part of the sources. Against whom the council took a stand. Against those who follow the Jews. That is, not the old Quarto Decimens from the 2nd and 3rd century, but rather what person that the French historian Louis Duchesne named Proto-Pasquite, who celebrated Easter on a Sunday after the 14th of Nisan, not on the 14th of Nisan, but the Sunday after, without no other criterion. The only criterion for these Christians was the 14th of Nisan. They were not quartodecimans because they didn't celebrate on the 14th of Nisan, but on Sunday immediately after. It's probable that the council was against these groups. These groups, second point, were groups in the Syrian area, not in Asia Minor, like the old Quartodecimans, but the East, Syrian East. It's what we find in the letter of Constantine and also in the Athanasian documents. What third teaching of the council, what does it mean to follow the Jews? The letter of Constantine say that these dissidents celebrate Easter a second time in the same year. What does it mean? Celebrate Easter a second time in the same year. In fact, the Jews in the 3rd and 4th century followed a lunar calendar, a year of 354 days, with the addition of an embolismic month, an additional or intercalary month every 3 years at the end of the 3rd year. The choice they made and the Proto-Pasquites made with them didn't know the vernal equinox, and this implied the possibility of an Easter feast before that equinox, and thus, yes, of 2 Easters in the current solar year. And conversely, the risk that there would not be no Easter the following year if the Jewish Passover that year fell by chance after the equinox. Yeah, thank you. One more step. To fully understand what it means to follow the Jews, we will return to the evolution of Jewish practice. And here we find Anatolius. Anatolius, who says, according to Eusebius, that the old Jews from the time of Philo and Josephus had a practice different from the Jews of his time, which included the vernal equinox. And to follow, not to follow the Jews, means to follow the Jews of the old, of the first century, according to Anatolius, quoted by Eusebius. Naturally, the basis of this is anti-Judaism, but also the accusation of breach of unity. Of breach of unity because communities were in the solace of Easter, while others were still in the macerations of Lent. And then I arrived to the conclusion immediately. I must say that all that shows that the Council has a very narrow aim. It wouldn't give a formula for calculating. The aim was unity. Yes, also with 3 criteria. That's Sunday, 14th of Nisan, and vernal equinox. But how to combine these 3 criteria? The Council never said something. I think we must have in the mind the narrowness of the aim, of the objective of the Council, as show all the subsequent history. And this subsequent history, you can read it when my paper will be published. If I Thank you very
much. We want to thank our 3 speakers. After listening to these presentations, I'm struck by God's particular providence in the election of Pope Leo XIV. No doubt in ecumenical dialogue, he will be able to put to very good use his undergraduate studies of mathematics. Thank you.
We have now the lunch in the garden. The lunch in the garden we will resume at 14:45. Yes, we have 15 minutes. We have 1 hour break now. 2:45. Thank you.